Isn't that a bit like Kemi Badenoch and Robert Jenrick in your own party?
Well, I think it's more like Nigel Farage falling out with Rupert Lowe and his own chairman, Mr Youssef, who went off in a huff yesterday. So I think that is the more appropriate analogy. Mr Farage's one-man personality cult seems to be falling apart here, a little bit like the spat you just reported.
Yeah. Why is it when I've spoken to Conservatives this week, they always bring up reform? What's the obsession?
No obsession, but you asked for the most apt analogy in British politics, and in terms of people having massive falling outs, I think that is the most apt analogy.
We'll come back to what Robert Jenrick's been up to in a moment, but actually, in terms of falling outs, what did happen, they would say successfully overnight in Hamilton, was Reform UK went from nowhere to coming third. Labour won. Does the Conservative Party have any relevance in Scotland anymore?
Well, I think it does. Obviously, the Conservatives are the opposition in the Scottish Parliament.
Yeah.
And, you know, we are fighting hard in Scotland, as we are across the whole country. I mean, that particular constituency where the by-election took place is an area where we've never really done well. It's historically been a huge Labour heartland. More recently, the SNP have held it. I think Labour won it at the last general election, that sort of area, the Westminster seat that roughly overlaps with the Scottish Parliament constituency. Labour won, I think, with a 10,000-odd majority. So we've always struggled in that particular area, but obviously we have more work to do.
A distant fourth. Reform were nowhere last time, a few dozen votes, and they've shot straight into third place and pretty close to winning it.
Yeah, look, they came third, we came fourth. We've got a lot more work to do.
There was a big distance there, Look, in terms of the work you need to do, it looks like you're edging closer to what could be a policy around the European Convention on Human Rights. Kemi Badenoch's going to talk about that today. We've heard Mel Stride anticipate that in recent days as well. Is that going to be the policy that you will pull the UK out of the European Convention on Human Rights?
Yeah, we are increasingly of the view that that is what needs to happen, because the way that the Strasbourg Court and actually domestic UK courts apply the European Convention means that some of the things that the British public elected Parliament to do actually can't be done. That applies to things like protecting veterans from vexatious prosecution. It includes to things like oil and gas drilling, but it also applies to immigration, where, for example, we think every single foreign criminal in this country should be returned to their country of nationality. Not some of them, but all of them. And the ECHR prevents that. I'll give you an example. There was a Zimbabwean paedophile who should have been deported back to Zimbabwe, as our law requires, but a court, a UK court in fact, using the ECHR, said no, if he goes back to Zimbabwe, he might face some hostility because he's a paedophile. And so instead they said he can stay here, where he exposes British children to risk. I think that's unacceptable. Now, we don't want to shoot from the hip and do this without proper thought. So what Kemi is going to announce in a few hours' time is that Lord Wolfson, one of the country's most eminent barristers, also the Shadow Attorney General, will conduct a 3 to 4 month detailed legal review into the various complexities of the question. So, you know, we think in principle this is a move we're going to have to take. But before we take a final decision, we do want to go through the legal detail to make sure we thought it through properly. Because unlike Reform, who just kind of shoot from the hip and say the first thing that comes into their head or the first thing that comes into Nigel Farage's head, we do want to think it through properly so that the media and the public can have confidence that this is going to work in practice.
There's an irony here, though, isn't there? You've been pointing the finger at Labour for all the reviews they've done since coming into government. Many of your previous leaders as Prime Ministers, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, talked about pulling us out of the European Convention. And here you are. It sounds like you'd like to come out of it, but you're going to have another review anyway that's going to kick things into the autumn.
Well, we're talking about 3 to 4 months, and the review will consider the specific legal questions.
What do you think now? Do you think we should come out of it as a country?
My view in principle is that we should, because we need to let the democratically elected Parliament do what the public want us to do, which is control our borders and protect veterans and everything else. But I also agree that before we commit to that, we should have it properly legally reviewed so that we know the full implications. We understand what the challenges are. We understand how those challenges can be overcome. We understand what it'll enable us to do.
Because, of course, there could be huge negative implications of this. There's plenty of people who like the European Convention on Human Rights. They like protection of human rights. That sets us apart from a lot of the world as a progressive, modernised nation. We protect people's rights.
Right, and of course we want to make sure those rights, like free speech, for example, continue to be protected. So that's one of the questions, of course, this review will address. Although I would also observe that countries like Australia and New Zealand managed to protect those rights without being in the European Convention on Human Rights. And of course, this country has enjoyed, a lot of protections and rights that long predate the European Convention. This country, the United Kingdom, has led the world in establishing rights for its citizens. But that is a really important point, and we need to make sure we have good answers to those questions.
Is everyone in the shadow cabinet on board with this? Because coming back to Robert Jenrick, who I mentioned at the start there, it does seem that he never stopped campaigning for the leadership, even though he lost the race a few months ago.
Look, Robert is a very energetic member of the shadow cabinet who is working hard, as we all are, to hold this failing Labour government to account. And we're all of us colleagues working towards that purpose, working in the same direction, exposing Labour's failings, whether it's on the taxes they've put up. They lied before the general election, put the taxes up. Whether it's Lord Hermer refusing to review the sentence of rapists and all
Hang on. They said they wouldn't put up income tax, VAT, national insurance.
And they put up national insurance.
For individuals.
And they put up
individuals. They put it up for companies.
Yeah, and the OBR say that 76% of that national insurance increase will end up getting passed on to workers. That is a tax rise on workers. And as we speak, people are losing their jobs or having their hours cut down because of Rachel Reeves' outrageous jobs tax. It is damaging our economy. People are losing their jobs. And Labour, I remember almost exactly a year ago to the day, we Conservatives in the election campaign said Labour would put up people's taxes by a huge amount. And Labour said we were lying. And then literally 8 weeks later in government, they did precisely that. And that's why the public are so angry with Labour.
Who caused the biggest tax burden in memory?
Well, look,
the Conservative Party did.
This current Labour government, the tax burden is much higher today than it was a year ago.
You took us there.
Look, taxes under the last government were higher than I would have liked, and we're going to work up plans to get the tax burden back down again. But the highest tax burden in history is the tax burden we're suffering today under this Labour government because of Rachel Reeves' budget. Just a few weeks ago, she put up national insurance, she put up business rates for small businesses. The list goes on, and that is why the growth prospects for our economy this year have been halved.
The economy is still growing. Yes, revisions have been downward from the OECD and the International Monetary Fund, I believe. But still, the economy is growing faster than many. So Labour would say their growth aspirations seem to be happening.
Come off it. So look, when we left office, we had the fastest growing economy in the G7, and inflation was down at the 2% target. Inflation is now almost double that, and our growth forecasts have been slashed because Rachel Reeves has imposed these massive tax rises across the entire economy.
Chris Philp, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.